Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 6, no hope difficulty, no life cube loss walkthrough, and this is chapter 5 of Jake's campaign. And this is a very short final chapter, and it's really cool. And I especially love the soundtrack here. This song that's playing right now, We're Finally Here, this is one of my favorite songs in this game. And then I also like the soundtrack that plays when you're with Kristen Pierce, and the soundtrack that plays when you're with Usanok, easily one of my favorite songs. I think out of all the Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 6 has the best soundtrack because it touches me emotionally, it's dramatic in certain parts, there's somberness to some of the music, and it's just a very great soundtrack. And screw anyone who says that the older Resident Evil games have a better soundtrack than the newer Resident Evil games, because they're only saying that to remain on the side of, oh, the older Resident Evil games are better than the newer Resident Evil games. It's just such a biased argument. And Servum17 feels the exact same way when I asked him about this particular discussion. He feels that it's just unfair to judge the soundtrack based on such biased thinking. And it's just, if such people were not in the Resident Evil community so much, maybe games like Resident Evil 2 Remake would actually be a lot better than what they are. But sadly, that is just the kind of fan that is rampant throughout the entire community of the Resident Evil games. And it's the kind of fans you do not want to take any influences from when you're trying to design a game series. But once Sherry has opened the door, you need to bisect this last Banji in order to progress with the sequence. But the most annoying part is trying to get your AI partner to the co-op action, because the amount of times the AI has been so slow to get to that co-op action, I've been hit by the Laska Banji, it's a little too much. Like, if the AI actually sprinted towards the co-op actions, like if you could somehow give your AI the command to actually sprint or hurry up, like, that would be so much more reliable, but you just can't do that. And speaking of the Laska Banji, Jake's campaign has the worst Laska Banji section in the entire game because of these cutscenes. The Laska Banji take advantage of these cutscenes by moving during them and setting up in positions where they can just spam attack like crazy and grab you the moment you come out of those cutscenes. And because it's such a big issue with this part of the game, I've had to resort to a checkpoint exploit in order to bypass this really bad design. So what I do is, while I'm holding on the lever, I go into my menu and I set up to restart the checkpoint. The moment the next checkpoint triggers, I restart the checkpoint before the cutscene triggers, because the moment the cutscene triggers, your ability to restart the checkpoint will be temporarily disabled, and during that time the Laska Banji will attack you. But if you restart the checkpoint, the Laska Banji will be nowhere near you, and you will have plenty of time to progress with the elevator sequence in order to get to the next level to allow you to interact with these switches. And if you are confused as to where to go, hold L1 on your controller in order to pull up the guidance marker. That will help in knowing exactly where you're supposed to go. And like I mentioned before in my Leon's campaign walkthrough, the guidance marker system is a really cool addition. It's so much better than the map system from the older Resident Evil games, because you don't have to go into a separate menu in order to view the map. You just go into this mode that allows you to see an arrow that tells you where you're supposed to go without interrupting the flow of the gameplay. Any kind of map system like that interrupts the flow of gameplay and it just takes you out of the experience, and it's just such a tedious process. I really don't like those kind of systems, and they started this trend with Resident Evil 5 and I really enjoy it. And I'm not even going to count Resident Evil 7 in that aspect, even though you do go into a separate menu, because of the fact that the game doesn't pause and you can still see a portion of the screen that shows you're in the game while you're doing the map. I don't really count it as something that breaks the immersion of Resident Evil 7, and for the most part, the map in Resident Evil 7 is very pointless. It's only useful for your first playthrough before you've already committed the map to memory, and you don't even need to view it anymore on repeat playthroughs. Because the maps in the older Resident Evil games and the newer Resident Evil games are very easy to memorize. I mean, the maps in Resident Evil 5 and this game, I use the map in Resident Evil 5 to keep track of where my AI partner is, and then the guidance marker system in Resident Evil 6 not only does it allow you to know where you're going in case you're a little confused or you just end up skipping things on accident and you need the guidance marker to know exactly where to go, but it affects your movement. Like, you can skip very lengthy turning animations by using the guidance marker system. Same with aiming, only this one, like, the camera and the character is taken control of by the guidance marker system, which makes it very reliable in doing these very fast turns, and in case you need to traverse a map. And those make up the reasons as to why I would like the guidance marker system. And furthermore, I don't understand why this game receives that kind of criticism when people want the old map system to return. And why on earth would you want to go into a separate menu to view a map system? Like technology has progressed so far that we don't need to have such obsolete and outdated models like that for just viewing separate menus. We can just have a very seamless process that doesn't interrupt the flow of gameplay. But apparently in a lot of these old school survival horror fans, like, they believe having that flow interrupted benefits survival horror, but that right there just makes no sense whatsoever. But I've just done the Laska Bungee section for Jake's campaign, but there's just one final thing we need to do, and it's just to deal with this one lone Laska Bungee, which is not a fight. All you gotta do is just survive, because the elevator is gonna be dropping every so often, and every time it drops, it makes you flinch. And the worst part of this is it doesn't affect the Laska Bungee. Like, a lot of the flinch animations in this game don't make any sense. Like, all these moments that force you to flinch, yet it doesn't cause the enemies to flinch. Why does it do that? It's just so unfair, and it gives the enemies a very cheap advantage. So to bypass this bad design, I'm just going to lie down on the ground, because while you're prone, you will not flinch. And this Laska Bungee is being very stupid right now. It's not trying to come after me. And once we get further down, we have to do some quick time events, but I'm just going to speed up the video because you don't need any help to understand how to do these quick time events. And this is a pretty lengthy process. And once we've done this sequence, this whole section will be over, and we'll be able to meet up with Chris and Piers. And I'm amazed that sequence is so much easier than the sections that Chris and Piers have to go through before they actually rendezvous with Jake and Sherry. Like, the stuff that Chris and Piers go through at the beginning of Chapter 5, way harder than what you go through in Jake's campaign, the very first time you start Chapter 5. It's interesting to contemplate how certain campaigns just have significantly easier sections than other campaigns. I mean, it's almost like two different teams developed, like, separate sections with different mentalities in mind. But I'm just wondering why it wasn't a uniform process. Like, why does one campaign get a significantly harder section, yet this other campaign doesn't? It's confusing, to say the least, but I guess in the case of Chris's campaign, because you've already gone through the Laska Bungee section, it wouldn't make sense to introduce the Laska Bungee again. I guess because of the fact that Chris is just a very seasoned veteran, and he's just a very notorious character in the Resident Evil series, they have to make up for that by giving Chris some very difficult sections compared to Jake and Sherry. And a lot of people would say that Jake and Sherry's campaign are the easiest campaigns out of all of Resident Evil 6, but I don't really agree with that, because some sequences in Jake's campaign are pretty challenging. I mean, Ada's section, I think Ada is probably the easiest because, of course, you're playing as a secret agent, and of course, you have to make sections that are accommodating for a secret agent like Ada. So that's why that campaign is a little bit easier. I mean, I'm not too sure what difficult parts of Ada's section really comes to mind, but I would guess maybe chapters 2 and 3 probably have some difficult sequences, but I'll have to play through Ada's campaign to understand where my perceptions lie when it comes to the difficulty. But the strategy for this sequence, which is exactly the same as my Chris's campaign strategy, is I use the grenade launcher to kill off the first 3 spawns of enemies that drop down from those doors, and then after the third door, I go to the other corner, and I just wait for the sniper, and then from here, I repeat the process. Of course, I'm not going to repeat it 3 times, because after the next time you deal with an enemy that comes from a door, the sniper's going to appear, so you just gotta follow exactly what I do. That being said, though, there is a bit of RNG with this section. I was playing through Chris's campaign the other day, and I was doing this section, and after I defeated the 3rd wave of enemies, the sniper appeared earlier than usual, and he shot me somehow. It's dumb that this can happen. It's bullcrap that the enemies can just choose to attack you whenever they want to. But I think it's a rare outcome that you're going to get. I think you can still progress with the sequence as normal, and try your best not to miss your grenades. And this right here, look at this. That right there is one of the minor issues that you can encounter in this game. Whenever the enemies are trying to transform into the suicide mutation, before they've even transformed, you have the ability to do a context-sensitive melee attack on them, and I assume the whole intention of that was to knock that enemy into other enemies to either deal a lot of damage to them or get rid of them entirely. But there's never a situation where that's needed or where that's actually going to be the case. And most of the time, I end up getting screwed by that because my AI partner accidentally knocks that enemy into me all the time, and I end up taking massive damage from that explosion. So I would have much rather they not give you the ability to do a context-sensitive melee attack against that enemy. And considering that whenever you initiate a context-sensitive melee attack on an enemy that's in the middle of transforming, it just immediately puts them into the fully mutated state, that is definitely problematic if they have the ability to explode when they get knocked back. And they don't get knocked back much, so if you accidentally knock them into a wall and they explode, you're done for. And a lot of the times, it just comes out of nowhere because you're assuming this enemy's not going to transform, but considering that the button for the context-sensitive melee attack is the exact same button as the normal melee, you just end up doing it on accident, and you can end up taking damage a lot of the times. So I'm not a big fan of that system. But now we have this final boss fight with Usanok, and this is a really fun final boss fight. My only issue with it is Usanok takes a tremendous amount of damage. He has more life than any of the other final bosses on this game. And there are a couple things you need to know about Usanok. So, Usanok has the ability to use a Wrecking Ball against you, as I'm going to call it. And you can actually crouch under that Wrecking Ball, but only when it is not on fire. Whenever he sets his Wrecking Ball on fire, it has extended range. Like, it has a greater hitbox. So, if you try to crouch under the flaming Wrecking Ball, it will still hit you. You need to initiate the crouch when Usanok's Wrecking Ball is not on fire. And also, explosives do a lot of damage to Usanok, because you'll notice that after about 3 or 4 hits from this grenade launcher, whenever I hit him with the last shot, whenever he's in an attack animation or whenever he's in a neutral state, it normally guarantees that he's going to get stunned. And while it is cool that he definitely takes a lot more damage from the explosives, I don't really understand the whole point of the stun. I mean, the stun could be very helpful if you're trying to cancel animations, but you know, considering how inconsistent it is at times, it's not that reliable, and the stun only lasts for about a second. But look at that. After about 8 explosions, he's already in the second phase, and he has way more health in the second phase. And the second phase is the hardest part of the fight, because the arena doesn't really benefit you that much. And considering that you're so close to him, and he has access to a lot of new moves that allow him to either damage you with lava, or just give him just the ability to cover such a wide range with his attacks, like that spinning move. That spin move that he does is his most dangerous attack, because it's very limited on how you're supposed to dodge it. You either have to dodge to the left, or if you're behind him, you have to get away from him. You have to stand very far away from him. You don't have to crouch it when you're right behind him and you're far away from him. But if you are close to him when you're behind him, there is a point in that spin attack where his Wrecking Ball is very close to him, and it actually clips on you and it does damage to you. So never get close to this attack, and always try to remain behind him so that the chances of him hitting you with that move are less. The other attack that Usanok has is this slam attack right here. So what happens is, he slams his Wrecking Ball into the ground, and then when he pulls it up, it releases lava. That move can be very deceptive at times, because it's hard to tell if he's aiming at you or your AI partner. If your AI partner is in a position where it makes it very confusing to understand if Usanok is trying to slam you or her, then it can be very problematic. And the best thing I can recommend for dodging that move is to run on the right-hand side. So run to his left so that you can avoid that slam attack if he is aimed at you. But you can clearly tell right here that he's aiming at Sherry. I mean, she's directly opposite me, and right there he's trying to shift. But he doesn't shift all the way a lot of the times. He doesn't have full-on tracking during the startup frames of the slam move, so he kind of stops midway through that tracking, and that makes running to his left-hand side a lot harder to do. So try to make sure you judge for that, and you'll be able to get past that move. But I have more than enough grenade launcher ammo to deal with them, and then once you get to that point, once Sherry grabs him, you gotta do a quick time event, and then it transitions you into this moment where both you and Sherry have lost your weapons, and Jake is going to be engaging in hand-to-hand combat with Usanok as a nice little heart to Albert Wesker, and you start to understand why Jake is definitely the son of Albert Wesker with the kind of techniques that he uses. In fact, I forgot to mention that the charge punch that Jake does, Wesker actually does that move in the Mercenaries mode of Resident Evil 5. I didn't realize that until I had actually looked up a Mercenaries video, and I had seen how similar the moves look. And also, some of the moves that Jake does, they definitely exceed normal human limitations. Albert Wesker was a POW of his own. He was actually manufactured, as was discussed in Resident Evil 5, which is why he's as strong as he is. And the virus only aided in allowing him to be significantly stronger. And for those people who are saying that Resident Evil 5 is just a cheap action game and they were just wondering why they went this direction, I mean, what were they expecting from Resident Evil 1 when Albert decided to inject himself with the T-virus? Or, I don't even know if it was it really the T-virus that Albert injected himself with, or was it some other variation of it? Because I don't remember the T-virus really granting that kind of capability. Or maybe the zombies were just a failed experimentation with that. But what were people expecting from the virus? Did they really just expect the virus to simply revive Albert and he'd be no different to like a normal human? No, like that makes zero sense. Why else do you think Albert developed that whole God complex system in Resident Evil 5? Because the virus helped contribute to the increase in his physical capabilities, and I think it probably impacted his mental capabilities as well as time went on. That not only that, but you know, Wesker is a complete psychopath, which is why he let that God complex come to mind, and that's what ultimately led to his downfall in Resident Evil 5. That and the fact that he absolutely humiliated Chris in Code Veronica. The amount of times Wesker came close to killing Chris, and Chris only escaped via lucky passes, like that must have been enough for Chris to have the motivations necessary to actually go through intense physical training to be on par with Wesker. And it's the kind of motivation that also applies to exercise, for instance, in the real world. You don't just simply start exercise and then that's what actually drives you. You know, you have to have the kind of like background in childhood or the actual motivations necessary to go through that kind of training and exercise. And, you know, in Chris's case, the motivations were even more extreme compared to what a normal individual does to gain a lot of that motivation. So that is definitely why Chris became who he was in Resident Evil 5, and that's definitely one of the main reasons why Wesker ultimately met his downfall in Resident Evil 5 at the hands of Chris. But I've just done that sequence. That sequence is impossible to die on. I think you have a limited health during that fight with Usnak, unless you take way too many hits. I mean, I've never died on that sequence, but whenever you use the quick shot against him, it is a guaranteed stun on every single hit. And then you also have the ability to counter Usnak, and the counters are pretty hard to do. I mean, the one where you have to counter Usnak's running attack, that's probably the hardest one. Although, you don't have to use the R2, you can just use square and X, and you can just mash the square and X prompt in order to do those. And that's a lot better, but you get no payoff in the end because you don't deal any damage to Usnak. The counters, you get payoff, but it's a lot harder to pull off. And I'm not too sure how much damage the counters do against Usnak, because it feels like the quick shots do way more damage. And considering that it's a full-blown stun against Usnak, and you can just back away from his attack when he starts, and then just reinitiate the loop, that's definitely the best method for dealing with him. But I just decided to do the fight the way I did, to add more variation to the fight, and just showcase a lot of the cool things that you can do. I mean, there were some cool things that I didn't show in that fight, but the fight had already ended at that point. And then after that, you have that little kunai climb sequence, and then at the end, you have to press circle as Jake, and then as Sherry, you have to press R2. And I've just sped up that whole moment because you don't need any help with quick time events. And this effectively concludes my No Hope Difficulty, No Life Q Lost walkthrough of Jake's campaign. Stay tuned for Ada's campaign and also other projects. I am planning on doing Assassin's Creed, and I'm just going to go through each of the individual games with a friend, because I think it'll be a nice breather from the typical Resident Evil content I normally post. You know, I want to embrace a lot of diversity in my channel, and Assassin's Creed will definitely provide for that, especially given that Valhalla released recently. It was okay, but it had problems, and considering that LaserZ has been doing a lot of videos on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I think that gives me a lot of motivation to do this dual commentary with my friend, and it's the first time I'm going to be doing anything like this with a dual commentary. Last time I did a dual commentary was back in Uncharted 4 with that walkthrough, but doing a playthrough of each of the individual Assassin's Creed games with a friend, that's going to be awesome. Of course, the only question that remains is how I'm going to edit the videos, because I don't know like how easy it's going to be to actually put commentary in these long durations of gameplay during very important parts. And am I also going to talk during the cutscenes? Like that's just the hard part about this, because it's such a lengthy process. It's going to be very hard to plan out how I'm going to edit it. I mean, it sounds like it's an easy thing to do. Like when you're just thinking about it, it sounds easy, but when you're actually executing everything and you're actually going through this, that's really where the challenge is going to occur. So I might try to do my very first recording with my friend, and I'll just see how that turns out. I mean, he's going to be recording Assassin's Creed 1 because I don't have the ability to record PS3 games. I can only record PS4 games and PS5 games. And from there, I'm just going to have to lay down the framework for how I'm going to do this, and that's just how it's going to go with those playthroughs. But thank you all for watching, and you take care now.